Thanks for having us here today. My name is Joe Cruse from the ACT Mountain Plains region. My colleague Kevin Houchin and I will be walking you through a couple of things today, and I think we have till a little bit after 2 o'clock. So kind of two parts. I'm going to start off with kind of telling you or giving a review to some of you, I'm sure, but maybe going a little deeper than maybe you have before. ACT's current college readiness system, and how does that question play into that? What is college readiness? And to answer that from ACT's standpoint is to look at our current college readiness system. Most of you are very familiar with the ACT, obviously. Many of your districts and your students take Explore and Plan. So I'm going to kind of take a step back and talk about those programs, how the definition of college readiness is woven there, and some of the foundational pieces. How do we get to what our college readiness benchmarks are? How do we get to our college readiness standards, and what does that mean? I'm going to go through some things and also show some examples of how your educators are currently seeing these components, either on a student level or an aggregate level. So that's my part of it. I'll be talking, thinking about what Randy just said, the college readiness piece, the academic side for first-year college success and a little bit beyond retention, and touching on the career interest piece that Randy mentioned. I'll go over that part. Kevin's going to go into the next generation of ACT assessments, the ACT Aspire program, and more multi-dimensional pieces and some of the soft skills as well. And also the workforce piece, he'll touch more than I will. So with that, I'll get started. The agenda for what my part of this is going to be real quickly about ACT, looking at the definition of college readiness. And as I mentioned, to really get into that, we have to go into these foundational pieces. And how many people related to those two, ACT's college readiness benchmarks, how many of you all feel that you have a really good grasp on what those are, what they're telling you, and how were derived? Couple, good. So I do have some work to do with that. And then the college readiness standards, how many people feel very comfortable with those? Not as many. So that's my main goal here, is to get you well acquainted with those, because that's really the foundation of what we currently have, and that very much springboards into the new Aspire system. It's the foundation that will be with that program as well. A small look at academic behaviors, the psychosocial, the behavioral piece, and then I've got some Kansas data to share as well. So getting started about ACT, most of you know who we are. We were very fortunate to have been working with Kansas since the very beginning. Kansas is one of the states that not adopted, but bought into what ACT was doing from the very beginning, and we appreciate the partnership over the years, and it's been a long one here in Kansas. Not-for-profit status, most of you know that as well. ACT is not-for-profit. Any revenue that we generate at ACT through our assessment and program goes right back into our research and product development, making sure that everything that we do is going to be most impactful for you and your students. The other piece I'll highlight is the research agenda. Coming to ACT from my previous world, I was in university admissions and recruitment down at the University of New Orleans, and coming into the ACT world, the amount of research that you have to become familiar with and proficient with to get up to speed on your job at ACT is overwhelming when you walk in the door. And there's a lot there, and all of our programs and services you can trace back to some research that ACT did. Any of our products, programs, comes from something, and we constantly do research to validate and make sure that we're putting the best thing out there. So I'll be referring to some of the research. Kevin will be referring to some of the research as well as we move along. Our locations, Iowa City is the main ACT office, and that's where most of the administration takes place. But we have regional offices as well, and the regional office that serves Kansas is the Mountain Plains office, which is over in Denver, technically Aurora, Colorado, and that's where both Kevin and I work from. That's mainly the client-facing folks are the ones that are out in the regional world. So why are we here today? What is college readiness? And this is what the definition is that ACT uses. College readiness is the level of preparation a student needs to be equipped to enroll and succeed without remediation in a credit-bearing first-year college course. So why, as you're looking at that definition, do I have at the bottom a URL that says act.org/Common Core. Well, some of you may know, but ACT was at the table with the National Governors Association and others when the Common Core first started, and we were, some of our researchers were their initial architects into developing the Common Core, and they developed the definition that we currently use. So as you look at this definition, and there is a match document. Has anyone seen the ACT Common Core match document where several, good. So if you go to that website, you can see the match document, which will show you standard for standard with ACT's college readiness standards, how they match up with the Common Core state standards. And the match is a fairly high degree of match between the standards, but it's not 100%. But a couple of notes. ACT's core standards, which are in our Quality Core program, are 100% aligned with Common Core. The ACT College Readiness Standards, which I will walk you through, are subject area, English, math, reading, and science, and we also have writing standards. The core standards for Quality Core are 100% aligned. With the new Aspire program, our standards will be 100% aligned with Common Core. So moving forward, we will have 100% alignment with the Common Core. So if you want to read more about that, you can jump to the website and check that out. But moving forward in my part of this presentation, this definition of college readiness is going to keep coming back in our assessments and in the tools that your educators actually see to see where students are, do they need interventions, at what key points do they need those. Speaking of the system, here is ACT's College and Career Readiness System. We have over 100 different assessments and programs and services at ACT, but here are kind of the really core pieces. The measuring student progress towards readiness. You're all pretty familiar with Explore Plan and the ACT. That's the longitudinal system that I'll be talking mostly about through my part of this. A little bit about Engage, which is the academic behavior piece. I won't really be talking about these others, but they are key parts. Quality Core is a program that helps with educators getting their heads around what a rigorous Algebra 1 course looks like, that type of thing. And you'll see, as Kevin talks about Aspire, some of these pieces are obviously woven into what Aspire is going to be. So my part here is going to mainly focus on Explore Plan and the ACT. Longitudinal system that are meant to work together. The common components there are they all have English, math, reading, and science as the subject area tests. The same for Explore Plan and the ACT. Do you all have, when you walked in, did you grab this at-a-glance document? If so, pull that out because this will be helpful as we walk through the next couple of slides. So the at-a-glance and pretty much the same graphic that you see up on the screen. So English, math, reading, and science being the components for Explore Plan and the ACT that are the same. The only difference is that the ACT has an optional writing component. Anybody have a thought as to why we would make that optional and not required as part of the ACT? Colleges just aren't using it at the rate to where we would make that decision to make it mandatory. We survey colleges every year through an institutional data questionnaire. We gather data from colleges to help us learn more about them so that we can populate our search engines for students whenever they are doing the college search. We also have iPhone applications where they can do the college search on there. Also, how many of you have picked up an ACT score report in the recent present, not recent future? Several of you. On the bottom, when a student sends scores to a college or university, we'll put a summary of those schools that they sent scores to. And there'll be some information about those schools, admission requirements, financial aid deadlines, student population. That's how we keep current on the school's information. One of the other questions we ask in that survey process is, what is your opinion of the writing assessment? Do you use it at all? Do you recommend it? Do you require it? Do you not care about it? Right now, roughly 20-ish% of schools are even looking at the writing assessment, so it's our position that if that number's that low at this point. We're not going to require the student to pay the additional fee and sit the additional time to take a test that not many people are using. So at this point, we have it as optional. There are states that are using it. Montana will be testing all of their students with the ACT plus writing this coming year. I think Wyoming is going to be doing the same, I believe, but Montana for sure will be. So keep your eyes on that, but right now, that's why it's optional. The other piece that is consistent with Explore, Plan, and the ACT is the career components. How many of you all are familiar with the World of Work map and the interest inventory? Several. Good. I have a couple of slides that I'll kind of go over that for those of you that are not that interested in it, but don't know a lot about it anyway. So those are the main components. Know that they're in this slide, for some reason, the graphics aren't showing up here. So they're supposed to be bars here and here, but you can see just pay attention to the numbers there. Explore, Plan, and the ACT are meant to be a longitudinal system where they work together. They certainly can be administered as standalone, but it's most powerful when they work together. And they are curriculum-based assessments. We are assessing what students should be learning in the classroom. And I'll get to that when I get to the foundational pieces and talk about the National Curriculum Survey in a little more detail. But for now, know that it's a curriculum-based assessments, and Explore is an 8th, 9th grade assessment where students are tested information that they should be learning to the 8th grade, Plan to the 10th grade, and the ACT to the 11th grade. So you see a common score scale that is represented there between the three. The ACT, you're probably pretty familiar, 1 to 36. The perfect 36 is what they would call a perfect score on that. But Explore and Plan, Explore tops out at 25 and Plan at 32. That's because we're testing the same subjects, English, math, reading, and science, but not all the material that's on Plan and the ACT would be on the Explore because the students haven't gotten to that information in the classroom yet. If you look on the back of this at-a-glance document, you will see the dark blue, the greenish, and the light purple columns that you see there are the numbers of items that are under each subject area for each test. So for example, if you go to the math test and go to plane geometry, you'll see that there are no items on plane geometry on Explore, but there are 11 in Plan and 14 on the ACT. You can see that material would not have been covered yet by the time the student got to that information on Explore. So you can see how the tests build upon each other, and you're able to measure that longitudinal growth of a student or a group of students if you're testing all students and looking at your aggregate data as it moves along. The career components, I mentioned the interest inventory. And Dr. Watson mentioned earlier as well about the different dimensions that people are looking at to see if a student is ready for college and career. The interest part plays into it. For all three assessments, we administer a 72-question interest inventory. And what we do is we ask them, and this is only part of it, I cut it off at 56 so that you could see it. But we ask the students to go through each of these items, and we ask them to respond in one of three ways. And that would be, I would like doing this activity, I'm indifferent about doing this activity, or I would dislike doing this activity. So we ask them to go through, explore a science museum, I'd like that. Play a musical instrument, I'm indifferent. Design a bird feeder, and so on. So the result of this is that we measure the student's interest. We also ask what their interests are, and that's also reported on the score report, to come up with a measured interest. And this is a shot of the website, but this World of Work map, probably familiar to a lot of you all. John Holland's work, Holland's Code, he actually worked at ACT in his early years, and his early work at ACT very much, you can see, fed what we continue to do here at ACT. So on the back of the student score report, you'll see a similar wheel to this. This is the shot of the website that the students can go to explore their career interests. But in essence, what we do is there are the 6 career areas. The highest score that comes back in a career area, we'll plot them on the wheel. So for this example, let's say the student fell in this area under natural science and technologies and engineering and technologies. We don't report just one area. We report the adjacent areas on the score report. This is not meant to be this is what you're going to be. It says engineering and technologies, pack your bags, that's what you're going to do. No, it's meant to be a conversation starter for students and getting this data in the hands of the educators to help the students explore careers that might be a good fit. that might be a good fit to what it lines up basically to what their likes are. And first, we help them find careers that line up with that. And then when we get to the ACT, we also put college majors that will help get them there. So on the student website, they could click into engineering and technologies and see here are all the fields that would go into that area. So aerospace engineer, if you click down, the website will help you see work tasks that are typically associated with that career, salary, size, and growth, entry requirements. If you scroll down, there's a lot more information there. There would be related careers and college majors that will get you there. So now that we've kind of gone over the components of Explorer Plan and the ACT, here's a look at what's going on in Kansas. Here are the numbers from the most recent graduating class for the ACT that took the test. So that's 23,907. Almost 24,000 students took the ACT from the graduating class of 2012. Very important to note that that's 81% of the graduating class. And how we arrive at that number, we look at the last time the student took the ACT. If they identify that they were a 2012 grad and they took the ACT as either a sophomore, junior, or senior, at the point of graduation, we go back and find the most recent test. So that does not represent the best or multiple. It represents the most recent test upon graduation. 81%, another key, is that these are the students that are self-selecting into the process. I've got some Kansas data that I'm going to finish with where you're going to see how these students actually performed, and keeping in mind that this is the self-selecting process, typically the college-looking crowd. So keep that in mind. Plan, our 10th grade assessment, 22,000 plus students took that. I've got some data on how they performed as well, so a very good chunk there. And then Explore, not nearly as many, only 11,000 students took Explore. So moving into the foundation, in order to really get the most out of ACT assessments and data, these are the pieces that really have to be understood, because you're going to see these two in particular all over our reporting. And if you get this, you're going to be able to capitalize on the information and the data that we provide to turn that information into insights about your students and help them if they need help and guide them along the way. So the survey first, which I'll go over, and then the benchmarks and standards. So the National Curriculum Survey is something we do every 3 to 4 years, and we survey educators from the middle school level, high school level, and freshman level, college instructor level, and we ask, what are the things that are important for students to know in order to be successful in a first-year credit-bearing college course? Remembering back to the definition I spoke about earlier, it keeps coming back. That is what determines what goes into our assessments. There's not a room in the back of our Iowa City campus where there are 3 or 4 people that are cranking out items to go on the test. The items come from the field, from educators like yourself. Item writers, anyone can apply to be one. We pay for people to do that, and they send the items into us, and it takes, and this is one of the things that amazed me most when I first started with ACT, I did our orientation program, and I remember seeing the agenda for the day, and I had a mental yawn when I saw test item development. I'm like, this is going to be amazing, and I checked out mentally before it even happened, but it happened to be the most amazing part of the day to see how, you remember the Schoolhouse Rock days, how a bill becomes a law, how an item makes it to an ACT test. It takes over a year for an item to make it onto an assessment. Starting with the survey, determining what we want to be assessing in the first place, we work with item writers to say, hey, we need items written to these standards, and we go back and forth with those item writers to make sure that A, they're assessing what we're looking for, and B, of course, to make sure they're not biased in any way, that type of thing. So that is the survey. If you want to see that, if you go to act.org/research, act.org/research, or just go to the main page and click on research, you can see it. The most recent one we did was 2009, so there's another one that's due out here pretty soon. Again, everything's starting with research with ACT. So how do you measure college readiness is the question of the day, and I'm going to go into how ACT does that now. But when you ask that question, how many people are currently using ACT's college readiness benchmarks as their definition of what college ready is? Couple non-enthusiastic hands, but a couple hands nonetheless. So I'm going to walk you through what it means to be college college ready, and keep in mind this is the college part of it, from ACT standpoint. This is the chart, and I'm going to walk you through an example of one of these, and then I'm going to take a step back and show you how we got there. So if you look along the left side here, you'll see the test: English, math, reading, and science. Those are the 4 components to explore, plan, and the ACT. The college course would be the corresponding freshman level college course. So for our English assessments correspond to freshman level English comp at a typical college or university. So what this chart means is that for English, let's use this as an example, if a student gets an 18 on the English section of the ACT, that means that student has about a 50% chance of getting a B or higher, or a 75% chance of getting a C or higher in that corresponding freshman level college course. So how did we get there? We surely didn't pull this information out of a hat. I mentioned the research part earlier. ACT is a college course placement service where we work with colleges and universities throughout our 50-year history to develop benchmarks specific to an individual institution. So Wichita State could come to us, and they probably have, come to us and say, we want to develop benchmarks specific to our English comp class, whatever that is. They would then give us the grades of the ACT-tested students that took English comp at Wichita State University. And our researchers would work to see which ACT scores meant that level of success, the 75% chance of a B and the 50% chance of a C or higher. So a couple of notes about that. ACT has worked with tons of schools over our history, so we have a huge database of actual student performance in the classroom. And the sample that we use to come up with the benchmarks that you see up here is 90,000 students and their grades from 98 different colleges and universities. And the colleges and universities were from all different types: public and private, geographically diverse, highly selective, all the way down to open enrollment and everything in between, different enrollment sizes, you name it. We looked at all different types of schools. So it's important, very important to know that these benchmarks are meant to help you understand the college readiness of a typical student at a typical college or university. It's not meant to be the final definition of it. It's meant to be a guideline. When the students get to their junior and senior years, when they're actually doing their college search and they're working with their college counselors and trying to find out where they fit in and what schools they are best for them, they're going to start getting information specific to the schools that they apply to. So if they apply to K-State, they're going to work with their counselor and then the admissions folks at K-State to see what is the benchmark score or the placement rate for, or the placement score for English comp there, or Algebra 1 there. So know that this is typical student at a typical college or university and the percentages that are there. And it's really powerful in a couple of ways, one of which for policymakers and state level folks to get a good idea of what it looks like for the whole state. But when you look at this backwards and see that the Explorer benchmark for English is a 13. So you find out if a student, maybe the student takes the ACT in the spring of their senior year and they get a 17 in English. There's no time to really do much for that student, right? They're only a couple months out from being finished. But if a student takes Explorer in the 8th grade and maybe they get an 11 in English, you know that that student is not on track to be ready for freshman level college English. And now there's time to do something about it. Now there's time for the professionals in your classrooms and your counseling offices to work with those students and help those students put something together to get back on track. So that would be the benchmarks. I'm going to stop and see if you've got any questions, because the next part of it is, okay, what do we do now that we find out that they're not on track? I'm going to get to that on the next part of this. But any questions? Are you comfortable with the benchmarks? Are there any questions about them before I move on? Because this is crucial for the understanding of the rest of what we're going to be doing. And when Kevin gets to the Aspire part, these benchmarks are going to go all the way back down to the 3rd grade. You feel good? Either I put you to sleep after a nice big barbecue lunch, or I really did a decent job. I'm going to go with the latter. So, great. That's the benchmark. So, I kind of talked about this already. Here are the particulars there. I talked about the survey, and if you want to see them, that's the URL. And I think the PowerPoint will be available after this as well. But if you go to act.org, it's easy to find the benchmarks. So the final question to this part is, all right, ACT tells you that they're ready, and our methodology, I mean, we went and we looked to see that success in the classroom, but what does that mean in terms of GPA once you get to college and retention once you get there? Here are some data from a report, and I know this is hard to read, so I'll read it for you. The source is a document called 2005 ACT College Readiness Benchmarks, Retention and First Year College GPA, What's the Connection? Light reading, right? That is the document, and if I'm going to pull up two pieces of data here, and you'll see along the bottom, you'll see benchmark attainment. So this group here met no benchmarks, and as you move along, you'll see different combinations of benchmarks met. So no benchmarks all the way to multiple benchmarks met. Each grouping, and this is the percent that returned for year 2 of college. Each grouping is going to be 100%, so 65, 35 would be 100. So of the students that met no benchmarks, 65%, and this is public 4-year institutions. And let me just take a stop and say, ACT licenses with the National Student Clearinghouse, so we know where 95%-ish of our students enroll in college. So that's how we do a lot of our research and are able to get to some of that outcome data. Okay, so 65% of students that met no benchmarks ended up coming back for year 2 of college, and 35% did not. So a clear pattern here. As benchmark attainment increases, so does second-year retention, and the melt goes away. You come here, for these 3 benchmarks met, 83% came back for year 2, and only 17% did not. Couple things of note here. So the pattern is obvious, but also note that 65% of students that met no benchmarks were coming back for year 2. Think back to when I said the benchmarks were for a typical student at a typical college or university. So if you don't meet the benchmarks, that does not mean that's the end of the story right there. Students still can be successful. And that is where a lot of those soft skills, the behavioral things come into play. The students that may not be all that great in the classroom, but they have the motivation and the drive to get it done. The other part I'll throw up here is the GPA. So freshman year GPA of the students that did come back, and the next line are students that didn't come back. So the purple line corresponds to the red bar, and the green goes to the blue. A full point plus of GPA difference at the end of a year for the students that came back versus those that did not. So there's a connection there. Okay, so now that we're pretty comfortable and familiar with the benchmarks, how do your educators use these? How do they see these, and where do they come back? So this is from the Explore Student Score Report, and this is similar to what you would see on Plan, and it's also reported on the ACT. At a glance, easy to see. This particular student is just a snapshot from a larger score report, but you'll see this student is below benchmark for reading and science, they're at benchmark for math, and they're above for English. So at a glance, right there, is the student on track or not? Student sees it. Of course, the counseling office sees it. Most schools are going to let this go back home and should let this go back home for the parents, and the parents can see it as well. So now, in the 8th grade, if there are some issues, we can now get some people around this student to help the student get back on track. This is an example of an aggregate report from a high school showing benchmark attainment by subject area. You can see that the first is school, showing a comparison to the state, and then finally a comparison to the nation. And you can see for English, math, reading, and science, plus students meeting all 4, where your school matches up against your district, your state, rather. Yeah, school, state, and then national. And we provide district reports as well. And there's also some trend data. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see, blow that up, and you'll see that 5 years of data, if your students are testing, will give you 5 years back of data in your reports, and you can see the school and the state, and then this is the percentage of students meeting benchmark. This example is English, so 84% in this school met English benchmark versus the state of 77, so you'd hopefully see a trend like that. of 84 down to 92. So you're able to see if there's any growth. So finishing up with the benchmarks, here's the next piece. And this is the piece that when I joined ACT 5.5 years ago, this was the aha moment for me. When I was in admissions, the ACT was an admissions test to me. It was a number. And I looked at a student's ACT score, and I knew that number was, I knew what that meant to me in relation to admission, scholarship, and placement. And the levels that we had set, that I had no idea how they got there and what we set. Probably worked with ACT to do it, but I had no idea what it meant. The standards are the really crucial piece that help educators translate a score to a skill. I had no idea that we could look at a score and see that a student would know specific skills based upon how they scored. So this is the real key piece. How many people have seen the big poster, the big College Readiness Standards poster? Of course, we have. It's a good reference for the classroom and the counseling office, but if you go here, act.org/standard, a lot of good resources there, but you can click through down to each subject area and you got the poster in your hands, actually. The full standards and ideas for progress are on the website. They're not all included in what you have there. So let's walk you through an example of the College Readiness Standards. So this would be just a snapshot of College Readiness Standards for mathematics. And you can see I only have 3 columns here. The content areas of basic operations and applications, probability, statistics and data analysis, and numbers, concepts, and properties. If you looked on the poster or looked in the book, this would just keep going because there's several other content areas, but so that you can see it, this is here. In the score range, this is the 16 to 19 score range, and here are the standards that are associated with it. So I'll use this example so that you can be better acquainted with the standards, but also understand the relationship between the assessments. Let's say that you have a student in McPherson that's an 8th grader that takes Explore today. And they get a 17 on the math section of Explore. Across the state in Overland Park, a different student takes Plan, a 10th grader. Same day, they get a 17 on the math section of Plan, the 10th grade test. And then still on the same day, across the state in Dodge City, an 11th grader sits for the ACT and gets a 17 on the math section of the ACT. 3 different students, 3 different grade levels, 3 different schools, 3 different assessments. But they all got the same score on the same section, the math section. You can come to the College Readiness Standards and see they got a 17, so they're in the 16 to 19 range. Under basic operations and applications, those 3 students should be able to solve routine 1-step arithmetic problems using whole numbers, fractions, and decimals, such as single-step percent. Those 3 students should be able to solve some routine 2-step problems. Under probability, statistics, and data analysis, those 3 students should be able to calculate the average of a list of numbers. They should be able to calculate the average given the number and data values and so on. So specifically stating out what those students should be able to do. And how we picked up these ranges here, the 16 to 19, the research behind it is 80% of students that fell in those ranges had demonstrated those skills. So that's only part of the equation, right? Helping define what students are able to do, looking at it in a bigger sense, looking at what concepts are sinking in from curriculum, looking at maybe the average for an Algebra 1 class at your school on Explore is a 17 in math. Having a conversation with the math faculty and saying, here are the things that are sinking in. Here's what's coming through in instruction. The other part is, what do you do next, right? What's the plan of action once we've defined what the students are likely to know? You look at the ideas for progress, and here are the specific things that will help that student get to the next level. So this is the 16 to 19 range. The next range up would be 20 to 23. Here are the specific things. Under basic operations and applications, work with those students to solve routine arithmetic problems that involve rates, proportions, and percents. Work with those students to model and solve problems that contain verbal and symbolic representations of money. So not only what they know, but what they're ready to learn next. So the standards, understanding that these are for all three, Explore, Plan, and the ACT, surely we don't just take the same question and ask the exact same question on all three exams, right? That wouldn't be appropriate. So I'm going to walk you through 3 questions, all to the same standard, but for the different assessments, so you can see the difference between what it would look like on Explore, Plan, and the ACT. So here's the standard. Standard for math, 16 to 19 range. The measurement strand is compute the perimeter of polygons when all side lengths are given. So the question is, on Explore, it would be like this. Which of the following is a general expression for the perimeter of a right triangle below in miles? You didn't think you were going to come to an ACT presentation and not get a quiz, did you? Answer, anybody? A, right? Pretty straightforward. We asked them to compute the perimeter, and we gave them all the side lengths. Okay, now, a plan question. Same standard, 16 to 19, compute the perimeter of polygons when all side lengths are given. The question now is, what is the perimeter in inches of a square whose sides each measure 5 and 5/8 inches? So right away, what's different about this question than the Explore question? No graph, no visual. Anything else? You actually have to perform the computation, right? Anything else? Fractions, another one. And you all mentioned the no visual piece. You also have to know that a square has 4 equal sides, right? Pretty basic, but there's no visual there to see it. So some key differences there, right? Answer? C. Good. All right. Finally, the ACT. Same standard. Compute the perimeter of polygons when all side lengths are given. The out-of-bounds lines around a basketball court in Central Park need to be repainted. The court is a rectangle 90 feet long and 50 feet wide. What is the perimeter in feet? Now, what's different from this one than from the other two? The sides vary, right? They have to know that there are 2 equal sides on one side and two equal but different length sides. Very good. Anything else? Is all the information necessary that we've given? Could that first sentence just be taken out of there? Also, there's more room for error, correct? What happens if a student, so what's the answer? D, right, 280. What happens if a student multiplied 90 times 50 to get the area? Right? So hopefully you can see there that the common thread, though, is we asked them to compute the perimeter of the polygon, and we gave them all the side lengths. That was consistent in all 3, but the complexity varied depending on what the students, the concepts they should, or the skills they should be able to have in those grade levels. So, any questions about the college readiness standards before I take you through a quick tour of how they're reported? Okay. So how are they reported? How do your educators see these? Here's a profile report, and you'll see that this is really hard to see, so I'll walk you through it. You'll see the standards ranges 1 to 12 all the way to 33 to 36. You'll see the grouping. This would be school versus state, and you can see where most of your students fall. Plus, you'll see at a glance percentage of students that meet versus do not meet. And powerful stuff, though. I mean, for science, for instance, you can see the vast majority of students fall on these 2 ranges. That's good information to get back to your science faculty and have them sit around the college readiness standards information and see what's sinking in, what's not, how do we get our students to the next level. This is the really powerful piece on the student's part. You get that student, an Explorer student that's below benchmark in English, how do you help them? This is the back of an Explorer, and Plan has the same thing. The back of either an Explorer or Plan student score report, there's an item response summary which shows them the total number of questions, what did they get right, what did they get wrong. But the powerful piece here is suggestions for improving your skills based on your scores. So based on whatever score they got, and remember on the front of this score report, there would be the little box saying at or above benchmark, right? Well, here in the back, Under English, for instance, under topic development, what can you do? Read closely writers like George Orwell, James Baldwin, etc. Describe the main idea of the paper you wrote. Read writing aloud. Cut out sentences that don't fit the topic. What you're looking at there are basically boiled down descriptions from the ideas for progress that I just showed you on the college readiness standards. And you can go to the college readiness standards and see the full thing, but here are some things to work directly with those students to help guide them to get to that next level. So finishing up with the standards, any questions on that before I close out with some data? Exciting? Yes?
Currently, the way I look at this with the ACT, I can see your standards or benchmarks to prepare for the ACT. Is there any future vision of breaking down data on high-performing and low-performing standards where you can remediate specific low-performing standards to prepare for a secondary test?
Okay. Did everybody hear that question? You got a good voice. So, did everybody hear it? Good. I don't know that I could repeat it if I tried. So, you're asking about analyzing the standards themselves to change them, or did I misunderstand you?
Analyzing the student performance on a first test, such as you take an ACT as a junior,
Mm-hmm.
the student does make a very high score. I know by looking at this what we need to prepare them for, but there's not a breakdown of sub-scores in the area to identify their low-performing areas to be prescriptive for the individual student.
Okay. Yeah, that I've got you now. I understand the question now. So with the ACT, we don't go that far. But with Explore and Plan, we provide item response summary reports where you can look, because you get to keep the test questions on Explore and Plan. They're low-stakes tests. ACT, you can't keep the test books. But for Explore and Plan, you get to keep the test booklets. We show you an item response summary showing every item under each area. So you'll see each item. This might be an Algebra 1 item, and it'll show the distribution of answers that your students gave, and there's a nationally normed reference group that you compare against. And you can see, okay, maybe we were, 10 points below the nationally normed reference group. But even worse, maybe there was maybe our wrong answers weren't evenly distributed. Maybe the vast majority of them went to this one wrong answer. So that's where you can put that back in the hands of an Algebra 1 teacher, and they can see, okay, they're all making this mistake in the formula, and they're all taking this wrong turn. That's what you can do now with our paper reporting. We are field testing right now our online reporting tool, which is going to take the place of all these paper reports, where you'll be able to drill down and actually see this, do the exact same thing I just mentioned, but also be able to connect it to the standard that it's actually assessing. So partial yes and partial no to your question. Explore and Plan, we do it, but for the ACT, we don't, because the test booklets are very highly controlled. It's a higher stakes test. Any other questions before we move on? I probably need to pick up the pace a little bit. So let me pick up the pace so Kevin can have about an hour for his part. Real quickly, there's a lot of talk these days in educational policy circles and in the education world, classroom and everything, about achievement gaps. How do we address achievement gaps? What can we do to try to eliminate those the best that we can? We have some research that came out in 2010 called Mind the Gaps, which looked at the achievement gaps, and we controlled for college readiness to see if the students were college ready according to our definition with our benchmarks. Did those achievement gaps close in or disappear? So with that, I pulled, it's a fairly large report, but I pulled 3 data points to show you, to paint a little bit of a picture for you. So this is students that enrolled in college first year. And remember, we licensed with the clearinghouse, so we know where most of our students enroll. So the first one I'm looking at is highest family income group versus lowest family income group. And if you wanted to see the definition of what we called that, it's in the report. So 82% of all students in the highest income group enrolled in college first year after high school versus 58% that were in the lowest group. So there's a 24-point gap between the high income group and the low income group of those enrolling in first year college. Now, when you control for college readiness, meaning that we just pulled out the students that were ready in all 4 areas, they met all 4 benchmarks, what happens? When you look at those students, 85% in the highest family income group enrolled in college and 77% in the low group. So there was a 16-point gap, closing in the gap of students going to college with once you control for college readiness. The next one I'm going to show you, this is the real one that is pretty powerful, I think. Now we're looking at the students that re-enrolled the second year. So they are already in college, and now did they come back for year 2 or not, or were they not retained? And now we're looking at white students and underrepresented minorities. The white students are in the top bar. So 74% of all students, white students, came back for year 2. 68% of underrepresented students, for a 6-point gap. When you look at the students that were ready in all 4 college benchmarks, college readiness benchmarks, pretty much disappears, only a 1-point gap. The final one is college completion within 5 years. I won't tell you how long it took me to graduate from college, but it wasn't that. And again, we're staying with white and underrepresented students. 39% of white students completed within 5 years, 26% of underrepresented minorities, 13-point gap. When you control for the college readiness factor, meeting all 4 benchmarks, that gap closes down a good bit, 5-point drop in the gap there. So just some achievement gap information and how that plays out when you look at the students that were meeting those benchmarks. So is it all about academic performance? Obviously not. There are multiple dimensions of readiness, and Dr. Watson talked about the raw data he collected, and that was the soft skills piece, I believe, was the highest one. So having said that, how many of you all are familiar with our Engage program? Fairly new program that we have. It was first branded, and Kevin knows, first branded as a student readiness inventory, and we changed the name a couple years back, and McPherson uses it here, and there's a 6th through 9th grade version and a 10th through 12th grade version and an early college version. And it helps educators with getting their heads around the psychosocial factors, the behavioral factors that play in academic performance, and the domains that we measure: motivation, social engagement, and self-regulation. And I'm staying real high level with this because we don't have the time to go into it all, but these are the domains and how these things kind of manifest themselves throughout life. So for under motivation, if a student completes their homework in middle school, will that translate to them studying hard in high school and then finally working productively in the work world? If they cooperate with others in middle school, do they socialize and engage with peers, and do they collaborate with coworkers and so on? So it's a fairly short, inexpensive a tool where students answer themselves and gives you some really, really good information to work with the behavioral skills. This is some data that shows some outcomes there. Basically, these are students that took both Explore and Engage, and how did they do once they got to high school? On the bottom, you'll see 3 groups: students that met no benchmarks on Explore, students that met 1 or 2, and students that met 3 or 4. And then finally, each grouping, the red would be the students in the bottom quarter of Engaged scale scores, meaning they had poor academic behaviors, and then the middle 50, and then finally the good academic behaviors were measured in the blue. So a clear pattern of, and I'm sorry, this is the high school GPA, so you can see how their high school GPA ended up. You can see a clear pattern of higher GPAs for the students with the better academic behaviors. But focus in over here. These students, 3 or 4 benchmarks, I've been spending most of the portion of my time talking about those are the students that are ready, right? They're meeting 3 or 4 benchmarks. But yet, these students that have the low academic behavior index scores, full point plus, worse on high school GPA. So those other skills are really important. And you look over here are students that met no benchmarks, but still they've got a 2.5 GPA because they may have the motivation and the drive to get them through and to make them a successful student. Okay, as I wrap up here, the college readiness in Kansas. How many people have seen the Kansas 2012 graduation report that ACT puts out, the college and career readiness report? Most of you have, so I'll go through this fairly quickly. But if you want to see it, act.org/research, you go to that site and you can download your state reports, the national report and any state report that you want. So keeping in mind, this is benchmark attainment. Red is Kansas, yellow is national. Keeping in mind 81% is the population you're dealing with. Nationally, it's about 52% taking the assessment. So you'll see Kansas is outpacing the nation in all benchmark attainment. But again, it's that self-selected group that's typically college-looking. This is something that we started doing a couple years ago to really kind of dive down in that, to see not only did they meet it or not, but who are the kids that were on the cusp? Who are the kids that were really close to meeting the benchmark? And you can see, for instance, in Kansas, 35% of students met the science benchmark, but 17% were within 2 points of meeting that benchmark. So a different way to look and see the data. Sometimes it can be pretty depressing if you look at it. And if you're able to slice it up and take it down into more manageable chunks, really helps to motivate staff and people to see that, yes, we can move people from one area to the other with the right interventions and the right data to start it off. This is broken down into the benchmarks, the numbers of benchmarks met. So 29% met all 4, but here are the other groups. And you're going to see this from state to state. Usually about a fifth to a quarter of all students are meeting no benchmarks. And again, you saw my data before. Those students are still going to college, some of them, and some of them are still being successful. But clearly this is the work that needs to be done nationwide. This is pretty similar to most states that test the percentages that you do. And then this is your plan students, those 22,000 students that met plan. So definitely a smaller, I don't know what percentage of students that is, but it's smaller than the ACT. You can see large chunks there in the middle that are within that couple points of the benchmark. And then for Explore, same thing. Much smaller in count, and so that's not really a representative sample, but that data is available. The last piece is ACT and college access. What we found is that as states are considering whether or not they want to do something like this statewide, access is usually a piece of the puzzle that they are trying to solve. They're trying to impact college going rates. They're trying to impact the whole access equation, making sure students have access to college. What we find is that when students are self-selecting into the process, typically it's more females than males test. Typically, it's more white students than underrepresented minorities, and typically it's more upper income students than lower income students. Big surprise, I know. When you bring all the students into the process, you typically bring in more males, more minority students, and more lower income students. And all the states that we've done this in, like Colorado, you do the research, it'll show that the percentage of male to female closed that gap. Same for the income levels and the ethnicity and the ethnic groups. Randy's got some information here from McPherson that I'll show you. They started testing all their students in 2000 for the grad class of 2011. So you can see he had 97 students in 2010 that self-selected into the process. The male-female mix was 47 male, 53 female. His was opposite. Usually we see more female than male. But then you go to the 2011 grads, it's 50-50. And then this fast forward to this year, 51-49, so it usually closes the gap. The ethnicity information in McPherson it wasn't very dramatic because of the population of students that were here. It looked pretty similar to what it was before. But if you look at the income levels, before it was 34% to 66% lower to middle income and middle to upper. But after that, it closed the gap from 34% to 42%. There were 29 kids in that lower to middle income group to 65 then. So I mention this because access just doesn't happen on its own. It's the information, once the students take the assessments, the ACT, if they opt into our Educational Opportunity Service and or send scores to colleges, now colleges know who they are. People that do what I used to do now have access to start recruiting those students and telling them about opportunities that are available on their campus, whether it be academic or scholarship opportunities that are there. And it makes a big difference. Our data shows that if students send their scores to a college or university as early as the junior year, odds are they're going to one of the schools where they sent scores to in their junior year. So they know, and they know earlier. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and hold questions until Kevin goes, and then we'll take questions together at the very end. So there is my contact information if you want it.